Burnt Toast!
Hello and welcome to the Midway Recap for this week's Burnt Toast show. We have a special one for you tonight. Later on in the show, we're going to have an interview with the great Tony Leone, the drummer from Little Feat. He's also played with Chris Robinson Brotherhood, Ola Bell, and he played double drums with Levon Helm with the Midnight Ramble Band. And he's got some great stories, and I'm really looking forward to sharing them with you. I can't thank Tony enough for being part of the show. Let's talk about what we just did, more immediate things. That last set, we're going to go backwards through the playlist. The last song, well, I'm going to apologize now. Last week I said some mildly disparaging things about Chris Robinson. And I've been a Chris Robinson fan for a very long time. I especially liked his solo career that became the Chris Robinson Brotherhood. But I'm a really big admirer of the Black Crowes. I saw them many times and really liked them. Starting way back in the 90s, I started seeing them. And they're a consistently great band. He's just one of the great rock singers of all time. And as soon as I said something, they released a couple of songs. They've got a new album coming out called Pound of Feathers that comes out on March 14th, and they released two songs. One of them was the song that we played in that playlist called Pharmacy Chronicles. What a great song. It sounds like just absolutely classic rock. I mean, it's got that sound to it like nothing I've heard in a while, I don't think. I mean, I've listened to it a lot since it came out. It just came out last week. The Black Crowes, Pound of Feathers. There's a track called Pharmacy Chronicles. Chris Robinson on the vocals. Rich Robinson, his brother, on the guitars. Sven Pippian on the bass. Those are the only folks listed as actual Black Crowes. I've heard that Eric Deutsch is on the keyboards on that song, and there's some really nice keyboards on that. I remember seeing Eric Deutsch with Charlie Hunter years back, and he's done a lot of really interesting stuff if you look him up on YouTube or Google. But Eric Deutsch, great player. So I think that's him, but they didn't credit anybody. We'll know when the album comes out. Pound of Feathers next month, or 2 months from now. Before that, we heard a band called Brad, and mostly it's known as a side project, a Seattle-based side project from the 90s that involved Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam. But this track in particular, which I understand was improvised in the studio, I don't know about that. That's a pretty good improv. That's Brad from an album called Shame, and the band was actually called Shame, and they couldn't get the copyright to it, the trademark to it, because there was a guy named Brad who had a band called Shame. So they changed the name of the band to Brad, and they named the album Shame. Got all that? This is a track called Buttercup, a beautiful track. Sean Smith on the vocals and the keyboards. As I said, Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam on the guitars, Rogan Hagar on the drums, and Jeremy Toback on the bass. Buttercup from Brad. Moving further up the playlist, we have a father and son duo, and not a really, I would say, very dysfunctional father and son duo. Tim Buckley and Jeff Buckley. We played Jeff Buckley last, so we'll approach him first. That was from his only completed album. We played the title track to Grace. It came out in August of 1994, and it was really. I remember when it first came out, what an incredible breath of fresh air that was, and how astounding it was. It didn't really take off, I don't think. It did okay, but Tim Buckley had sort of wandered around. He went to Berklee College of Music for a while, sort of wandered around the country a little bit. There's a great book actually called Dream Brother that's about both Tim and Jeff Buckley, and one chapter is about Tim, and the next is about Jeff, and so on and so on. And after a while, you have to sort of look to see which one you're reading about. Both of them died very young, and it's a great book if you get a chance. Dream Brother. Jeff Buckley Jeff Buckley was sort of discovered at a place called Chenet in the East Village. I think he played there at least once a week, And word really got out about this amazing singer, and he was an amazing singer. This is just a great vocal performance, a tremendous vocal performance. His father was also a completely individual singer with just unbelievable technical capabilities. But that was Grace. Jeff Buckley on the vocals and the guitars, Gary Lucas on the guitar. Gary Lucas, we'll continue here in a second. Gary Lucas on the guitar, Mick Grandal on the bass, and Matt Johnston on the drums. Carl Berger did the string arrangement. What a great overall arrangement to this song. Very powerful, and once again, the vocal just breathtaking. Gary Lucas and Jeff Buckley had a band called Gods and Monsters in the early 90s in New York. And Gary Lucas co-wrote this song. He had played with Captain Beefheart, of all people. That's kind of an interesting connection there. Before that, we heard Tim Buckley from his sixth LP called Star Sailor, which represented, he sort of came from he was on Elektra Records. It was a folk label, and he was signed. His first album, I think, came out in '66. And his albums got progressively weirder as he got more into avant-garde music. This album, Star Sailor, seemed to reflect a full embrace of avant-garde music. And it was released on Frank Zappa's Straight Records. It came out in November of 1970. And the Mothers of Invention are in the band on some of the songs. Really, really intense songs with really outside vocals. This one, not so much, though. This song was written in 1967, and he had tried to record it various times without any luck. Interesting side note, the very last episode, the finale episode of the Monkees TV show, usually at the end they would do like a little tag where they were talking that didn't have anything to do with the rest of the episode. But this one, it was just Mickey Dolenz introducing Tim Buckley, and he did this song before it was ever released. Song to the Siren, a beautiful song. Tim Buckley on the guitars and the otherworldly vocals, Tim Buckley. Before that, we heard one of the great fusion bands of the 1970s, this time in an acoustic format, but that was the last album that Chick Corea did with his band Return to Forever that featured electric instruments and the guitar. That came out in February of 1976. I guess there was a lot of tumultuousness, there's a big word for you, during the recording. I understand that at some point some of the guys in the band were not happy with Chick's final mix and sort of took it away from him and remixed it themselves. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what I've heard. And I've talked to a couple of them, but they were kind of elusive about that. Chick Corea on the acoustic piano, Stanley Clarke on the acoustic bass, one of the great bass players. Al Di Meola on the acoustic guitar, Lenny White on the drums, an amazing arrangement, an amazing band. Return to Forever, Romantic Warrior, we played the title track written by Chick Corea. Before that, another fusion tune from the 1970s, this time from the Brazilian pianist and arranger Eumir Deodato. It was an album called Prelude, and we played Also Sprach Zarathustra, which, if you can believe this, that song reached number 2 on the Billboard charts. A jazz song, an instrumental, reached number 2 on the Billboard charts. It was based on Also Sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss, and it was featured, that piece, the Richard Strauss piece, was featured in Stanley Kubrick's film 2001 from 1969. So it was kind of fresh for everybody, and he did a funk take on it. Eumir Deodato on the electric piano, Ron Carter, the most recorded bass player of all time, most famous for playing with Miles Davis in the 1960s in his second classic quintet on the bass, along with Stanley Clarke. There he is again. So 2 bass players, Billy Cobham, the great Billy Cobham on the drums, John Tropea featured on guitar, and Airto Moreira and Ray Barretto, 2 formidable percussionists playing percussion on that one. Deodato, that was on CTI Records, Creed Taylor International. Creed Taylor worked for A&M Records as an arranger and producer, and then started his own label, and one of the, they did some really great albums. Before I talk about what it became, let's talk about the Freddie Hubbard Red Clay album, Beyond the Blue Horizon by George Benson, Moon Germs by Joe Farrell, those Elvin Jones albums that are on CTI. There are so many great albums. First Light by Freddie Hubbard. But one of the things that Creed Taylor believed was that if you put strings and horns on it, it made it more commercial. Well, not generally if it's 12 minutes long, but okie doke. But anyway, that was Creed Taylor. So there was a giant orchestra on that as well because it was on Creed Taylor's label. Before that, we heard Chicago, or better yet, the Chicago Transit Authority. That was the name of the album. It was a double album, their debut album that came out in April of 1969. It initially flopped, wasn't a hit at all, but eventually spent 171 weeks on the Billboard charts. That's a lot. Uh, when their second album came out, a couple of songs really took off, and then people went back and started checking out that album. And they were already doing okay from touring and a lot of college radio play. Terry Kath wrote that song. He also played lead guitar and did the lead vocals. Robert Lamb on the keyboards, Peter Cetera on the bass, Danny Seraphin on the drums, James Pankow on the trombone, Lee Loughnane on the trumpet, and Walter Perez-Zader on the saxophone. The classic lineup of Chicago. Now, interestingly enough, Chicago's going out on the road this summer with Styx, which basically that's two bands from Chicago. The interesting thing about Chicago is that James Pankow and Robert Lamb have both left the band. And so it's left with just Lee Loughnane and a couple of players that have been there for a while. But other than that, it's kind of a lot of guys that are kind of sidemen that are sort of interchangeable. This is real questionable. Like, when is a band no longer a band? It's an existential question, but it's real. When do you keep paying? Why? Let's. When do you stop paying to see a band because they're not that band anymore? Okay. All right. You'll have to ask ChatGPT. Before that, we heard Don Was with his group, the Pan Detroit Orchestra. New album called Groove in the Face of Adversity. And that was a track called I Ain't Got Nothing But Time. Don Was the president of Blue Note Records since 2011. He's had a storied career, which we're going to run down before we get into anything on this song. Interestingly enough, this is on Mack Avenue Records, a jazz label based out of Detroit. I thought that it would be on Blue Note, but okay, I guess that's more objective. Don was born Donald Fagenson in Detroit. He had a friend named David Weiss, who was a music writer, and they decided to form their own band, and they called it Was Not Was and changed their last names to Was. Don Was and Dave Was. And they recorded 4 LPs in the 1980s, and some of them were pretty big hits. They were very, very eccentric. They had one album where both Ozzy Osbourne and Mel Torme did vocals. They had songs called Woodwork Squeaks and Out Come the Freaks and Oh, Mr. Friction. And of course, Hello Dad, I'm in Jail. That's a great one too, relatively speaking, great title. But anyway, they did a lot of very eccentric stuff, and the horn parts on this song are very reminiscent of the horn parts on a lot of the Was Not Was stuff. After Was Not Was, Don Was became a very sought-after producer. He first produced Bonnie Raitt's album, Nick of Time, and won a Grammy for it, which made him a hot commodity. He's produced all the Rolling Stones albums since the 80s. He's produced Brian Wilson, the Black Crowes, the B-52s. Matter of fact, if you look at the Love Shack video, back when they had videos on MTV, he's in the video, snapping his fingers and playing keyboards. That's Don Was. And in 2011, he became the president of Blue Note Records. That's an interesting way to go. Oh, Mr. Friction to president of Blue Note. Okie doke. In 2018, he joined Bob Weir and Jay Lane in the Wolf Brothers, and he was with that group up until recently when, of course, Weir passed away. But that's Don Was. I Ain't Got Nothing But Time. The album is called Groove in the Face of Adversity. Don Was on the acoustic bass, Stephanie Christiane on the vocals, Mahindi on the percussion, John Douglas on the trumpet, Jeff Kennedy on the drums, Luis Resto, who did a lot of work with Was Not Was, on the keyboards, Wayne Gerard on the guitar, Vincent Chandler on the trombone, Dave McMurray, who also spent a lot of time with Was Not Was, on tenor saxophone. That's a gentleman who is on Blue Note Records, David McMurray. And as I said, Don Was. So that's Don Was. That's a great tune. Nice jam. Sounds great. Love the drummer. We started off the set with, before Don Was, we heard Little Feat, getting you ready for the interview with Tony Leone later on. We played some Little Feat from their latest album called Strike Up the Band that came out in May of 2025. And we played a track called Too High to Cut My Hair. It was written by the two guitarists, Scott Sherrard and Fred Tackett. Scott Sherrard on the lead lead vocals and guitar. They both solo. Fred Tackett on guitar, Bill Payne on the keyboards, Kenny Gradney on the bass, been there since 72. Sam Clayton on percussion and background vocals, been there since 72. Tony Leone on the drums, and they were augmented by a horn section. Art Ed Maston on the saxophone, and Mark Franklin on the trumpet. Kind of a Tower of Power vibe, maybe a little bit. But anyway, that was Little Feat, Too High to Cut My Hair. We started off with the Parlor Greens, the great organ group that's on Coal Mine Records. They've got a new album coming out, but this was an advanced single that came out last week called Eat Your Greens. Tim Carman on the drums. Tim Carman is a teacher and author, and also plays with the blues band GA20. Jimmy James on the guitar. We know him from the Delvon Lamar organ trio. He's on all their early stuff. Adam Scone on the organ. He's on a couple of the J.J. Gray and Mofro albums. He played with Lou Donaldson, the great alto saxophonist that did organ group stuff in the 1960s and 70s. And he played with the Sugarman 3 on Daptone Records. So that was it. That's all the way back up the playlist. I want to make sure that we say that, as always, our show is sponsored by my great friend, Mr. John McDonald at Premier Chiropractic. 7113, is that right?
Yes.
7113 West Jefferson Boulevard, Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's an affordable walk-in clinic, and I invite everybody to stop in and see Dr. John. And as I like to say, of course, the Burnt Toast Show is sponsored by Dr. John. He does great work. Go and see him. We're coming up with another set right now. We're getting ready for the interview with Tony Leone. And once again, I want to mention how gracious Tony was with his time and how much I appreciate him coming on and doing this interview with me. And I think he's got a lot of great stories, and I think you'll really, really dig it. He's really been around a lot of different kinds of music, and he's got a lot of great things to say about music and Levon Helm and everybody that he's played with, and the future of Little Feat, because they're doing an extended farewell tour right now. This next set, we're going to play 3 tracks like we usually do. We'll play some Dylan, and then the band, and then the Rolling Stones. The Bob Dylan that I've chosen, I think, is very appropriate culturally right now. It's a song called Everything is Broken. And it's from the album Oh Mercy from 1989. It was produced by the great producer Daniel Lanois. Features Bob Dylan on the vocals and the guitar. Most of the rest of these guys are from the Neville Brothers Band, which they also did an album with Daniel Lanois. Brian Stoltz on the guitar, Tony Hall on the bass, who's now with Dumpsta Funk, and Willie Green, Mean Willie Green on the drums. They were joined by Daryl Johnson on percussion. Bob Dylan, Everything is Broken. After that, the band from what they call the Brown Album. It was their second album. The first album was music from Big Pink, and the second album is called The Band, but there's a Brown cover, so people call it the Brown Album. Came out in 1969. We'll listen to a Robbie Robertson composition called King Harvest Has Surely Come, although if you read, Levon Helm refutes a lot of the idea that Robbie Robertson wrote those songs by himself. He refuted a lot of things about Robbie Robertson. That did not go well after they broke up. But I believe that they were able to reconcile before Levon passed, which is very cool. This is King Harvest Has Surely Come. Richard Manuel on the piano, lead and background vocals. Rick Danko on the bass, Levon Helm on the drums and background vocals. Some really nice drumming on this. Garth Hudson on the Lowry organ, and Robbie Robertson on the guitar. The band, King Harvest Has Surely Come. We'll close out the set before we get to Tony with the Rolling Stones from the Exile on Main Street album from 1972, and we'll play one of my all-time favorites, Loving Cup. Mick Jagger on the lead and background vocals, Keith Richards on the guitar and background vocals, Bill Wyman on the bass, Charlie Watts on the drums, and they are joined by Bobby Keys on the saxophone and Jim Price on the trumpet and trombone. And those gentlemen just played on everything. They were on the Delaney and Bonnie stuff. They were on Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen. They were all over the place, and they played with the Stones. And now we're going to talk about somebody really special. The piano, which is featured on that song, is by a gentleman named Nicky Hopkins, an English session musician who later moved to California and played with a lot of Northern California artists as well. And Nicky Hopkins, okay, you ready? This is a list. Nicky Hopkins played with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Kinks, the Steve Miller Band, Jefferson Airplane, Rod Stewart, all individual Beatles, George Harrison, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Ringo Starr, the Hollies, Cat Stevens, Carly Simon, Harry Nilsson, Joe Walsh, Peter Frampton, the Jerry Garcia Band, the Jeff Beck Group, Joe Cocker, Art Garfunkel, Badfinger, the Quicksilver Messenger Service, and Donovan. Nicky Hopkins passed away at the age of 50 in 1994 from Crohn's disease, complications from Crohn's disease, which he had suffered from for a long time. Boy, he packed a lot in, didn't he? He packed a lot in. And now we're going to move right along. I do want to mention that after the Tony Leone interview on this playlist, I'll make sure that I have a highlight reel of videos that feature Tony Leone. I'm so proud that I got to talk to him, and he's such a great player and a great guy. I hope you enjoy my interview with Tony Leone. Until next week.
Burnt Toast!